Brûlé. This is Steve Brûlé, and it is coffee time, a time where I go over some of the things that have come across my desk in the last couple of days, or at least since the last coffee break session. Today, the topic is the incredible invisible women. And I came across this one because no one's talking about women's influence in the events of our day today, especially about the leadership of the Black Lives Matter, where the riots and the and the protests and so on are going down. And another incident came across my desk too, because this is related to slavery. The whole Black Lives Matter issue comes down to the history of slavery in the U.S., and this history keeps resurfacing. And one of the things that was pointed out to me by my friend Scott, and I saw it on Facebook, is that there is slavery right here on this island I'm living on right now, the Dominican Republic, but in Haiti is part of the same island. And there's a form of slavery that's talked about quite a lot here, but not much is done about it. And it's called reste avec. Reste avec is a contraction of two French words, reste and avec. Reste means to stay in French, and avec means with, and it's to stay with. And it largely affects children. And these children are sold by, very often, the mothers to other women who then sell them to other families. And these children spend their entire childhood serving their slave family, their slave owner, the family that owns them. This is going on in Haiti as we speak today. There's an estimated 250,000 children affected by this. So I'm going to get to that in a minute. And that's the main topic of the show today. But first, I'm going to go over a few things shorter, smaller items. And I want to draw your attention, of course, to my Patriarchy VIP Club membership card, which authorizes me to comment on all of the carryings on of the global evil feminist empire that wraps its fingers all the way around the world. And I'm going to acknowledge some of the regulars here. We got Michael Keller in the comments and Stephen Larassi. And what else do we? Jose here, Jose Veguila. Welcome back to the regulars. Now, one of the before I get straight into that topic, and it's a topic of this topic of concern, and I call it the incredible invisible women, because women's culpability in these problems is deftly erased by feminists. There's a lot of argumentation, a lot of false logic and rationale. All of it points to creating, rather erasing any guilt that women are in any of these issues. It is the feminists have spent the last 50, 60 years creating an ideology which places women as a victim in every single situation, no matter what they do. We're seeing it in the law today in terms of when a woman murders her husband, she now can claim coercive control, and it's very easy to argue it, as we saw with the woman who got off for murdering her husband, bludgeoning him to death with a hammer in Australia. Coercive control. The unifying feature, and that is spread throughout all feminist ideology, is that women are victims and men are villains, men are perpetrators. And this false ideology is responsible for extending, making worse, exacerbating, escalating all of the issues that feminists pretend to care about. These feminists care only about one issue. That's attacking men they hate and trying to get more power and privilege by attacking men that they hate. I'm going to pause here for a moment and acknowledge Carl, whose generous donation of Studio Brûlé. And Carl says, keep up the great work coming, Steve. You and Janice are a voice of reason in these crazy times. Thank you very much, Carl K. And that is an understatement if I ever heard of it. These are crazy times. Not saying that we are the biggest of voices by any stretch. There's some great voices out there that are documenting this crazy time. Not the least of which is Candace Owens, and Paul Joseph Watson and Tucker Carlson. I've been watching a few of his videos. He is on spot and he's under attack. And I'm going to pop a couple of screen caps up there. Tucker Carlson is calling it out for the way it is, and he is under attack for it by some big companies, by the way, who are pulling their advertising from Fox News as a result of what he's saying. If you haven't been watching some of Tucker Carlson's recent videos, I suggest you do. He is on point. He doesn't pull any punches, and that's what we need today. We need people to stick their neck out, to call it what it is, to put your opinion out there, not in hatred, but try to reason your opinion as well as you can. I know I fall on my face a lot when I try to reason things and I forget certain incidents and don't make the best argument that could possibly be made by other people, perhaps. But I encourage people to, yes, contest what you're being told, even in public with your friends and family, if you can stomach it, because you're going to lose friends and family, as I am, as we speak, as this thing goes on. I'm losing them at the not a very strong rate, but I know there's a lot of quiet ones out there who are thinking, ooh, I don't know if I want to admit Steve Brule is in my family or my friend or whatnot. There's some of that that's going to go on. I can't help it. The saving grace for me as being 60 years old is that most of my life is behind me by now. And so whatever happens, I don't have to live with it as long as some young guys do. And I know that is a big concern for young guys starting out. If they have to speak up, then they are risking literally their entire lives and their productive part of their work lives. It is a very big risk you're taking as a young person, for sure. So, something caught my attention yesterday as we were talking about this stuff. Oh, I forgot. I was going to go through a couple of quick items here. Here is a couple of memes that I like in particular. This one never gets old for me. It just seems to capture Joe Biden and his spirit. This is the spirit of Joe Biden. Read it with me. It's just wonderful. Goats are like mushrooms. If you shoot a duck, I'm scared of toasters. That's about as close to making sense that Joe Biden ever gets. And he's a potential president of the US. It really characterizes the times we're living in. Now, let's. Why is that not moving forward here? Oh, I expanded it up. Here is another meme that I just love. It just captures the essence of our time as well. Memes like this are great because they bring all these issues together in one short little thing. And at the top, we see a well-dressed, wealthy woman, apparently facing a reporter or maybe a police officer, who knows. He died of natural causes, she says. The guy says, you pushed him off a roof. Gravity is natural. And the response, of course, is COVID-19 it is then. There we have a woman pushing her husband off the roof to his death, who is getting off with it. And for the benefit of the narrative of the day, we're going to call it COVID-19. Wonderful meme. I don't remember who first sent that around. Now it's always a pleasure to quote Candace Owens. Not that I do it very much, but let's read what Candace Owens says here. I wonder if we're moving past the point of reconciliation with the left. I wonder the same thing myself. Reading onward, maybe we'd all be happier letting them pick a few states they can turn into their own country with no guns, no police, no statues, no genders, no flags, no men, and no electricity. The United Freaks of America. It is true. There's an absolute hysterical insanity that is spread right through the left of the US. And to be honest, it should be workable to split the US up. You know, let the hardworking, honest people get on with building a good life for themselves, and let these other people worry about their mental illness and, stew in it and nurse their wounds, nurse their angers, nurse their craziness in their own little country. There is something to be said for that. And someone on Facebook pointed out, that is what I think, is it Pakistan or no, India and another country. Now I should know this. They split up on ideological basis as well. And it seems to maybe sometimes that's a divorce. That is what we call divorce. And I know some people are upset with divorce rates and whatnot, but some situations cannot be saved. And so if everybody can be happier by divorcing, in this case, splitting the US up, let the Democrats take the Democrat strongholds, let the Republicans take the Republican strongholds, give everybody some period of time to readjust if they don't want to be in what's going to be their stronghold, and then call it a day. Maybe it takes a year or two for people to move into the country of their choice. Give everybody the freedom to move to where they want to move to. Give them lots of time. But what's the point of keeping a dysfunctional marriage together? Eventually, anyone who's been in a dysfunctional marriage and you've been to a counselor, you've tried to sort things out, but there's irreconcilable differences. The solution is divorce. Divorce is with us for a reason, and sometimes it's warranted. It's certainly looking like that way in the US today. So let's move on a little bit here. Yesterday, I just wanted to touch base on something I'd forgotten to mention yesterday. We talked about the laws and the claim by feminists that there's going to be a spike in women seeking divorces, and it's all men's fault. Of course, it's always men's fault. This is a claim that feminists come up with since the beginning, and feminists never need any evidence or rationale for their claims. They just make them. They've conditioned the society, a huge chunk of our society, just to accept whatever nonsense comes out of their mouth. And it's always man bad, woman good, man villain, woman victim. You can predict it just as well as you can predict the sun coming up every day. Reading this title with me: Coronavirus, no spike in home violence, police say. This came out June 10th, which would be 2 days ago. They've actually looked into this so far, and the police have said they're not seeing a spike in home violence in the coronavirus lockdown. And yesterday we saw an article where we saw the men were not dumping the extra work onto their wives. Men were stepping up and, in fact, taking the dangerous work. What is going on here is that, again, not that this is going to change feminists or change people's view of the truth here, because feminists have been at this lying for 60 years. But every one of the feminist predictions is proving to be false, as usual. But that doesn't affect feminists. They have a religion. Their religion is based on belief. And their belief is that men have oppressed women throughout all history, and they're doing it today, God damn it. Now I'm just going to pause here and recognize Oki Migtal. Thank you so much for your support of Studio Brule, Oki. And Oki rightly points out marriage counseling is BS. It is true. There's a possibility that if you talk with your neighbor and talk out some friends, you might, or your family members, you might get past some issues in your marriage. Talking does help. Talking amongst one another is what helps. Sometimes a third perspective can help get people past some grievances. But we've been talking about this for decades. Feminists have taken over the left. There is no change in feminists. They're getting deeper and deeper into their insanity. They're dug in. It's irreconcilable. It's time for the U.S. to divorce. In any case, here we are. There's no spike in home violence. And here another comment from yesterday. Someone, a viewer, and I don't like to talk badly about subscribers and viewers, but I had to respond to this. I do sometimes. I don't always, I'm not always very politically correct, you might say. But this fellow, what he got out of yesterday's coffee session, which was silence, your silence is not enough. He's got out of it that I think Black lives don't matter then. And this is exactly the problem. This is exactly the problem. They're claiming that if you don't get on board with their full I'm a victim mentality that allows them to go around and abuse everybody because they claim to be a victim, then you claim that their lives don't matter. Everybody's lives matter. Black lives, Chinese lives, white lives, children's lives, dogs' lives, cats' lives. I like dogs and cats too. But here's what he got out of it, and this is the problem. That you make that conclusion from this presentation is why we have a problem. We have a problem because people are calling themselves Black Lives Matter. That's the name of a group. Nobody in my lifetime has ever said Black lives don't matter. Nobody. All right, let's move on here. And here is part of the whole reason why I wanted to bring up the fact that there's no increased violence in evidence that was in Australia, by the way, and I think the same thing applies to the whole Western world. Let's read this headline again. Divorce reforms delayed despite expected surge of post-pandemic marriage breakups in Canada. There may well be a surge in marriage breakups, not because I think there would be a surge in domestic violence at all, but just people cooped up together tend to irritate each other more. They have more arguments, and higher percentage of them having more arguments may lead to the belief that we can't stand one another anymore. Sometimes people's angry words can't be walked back, and one party or both don't want reconciliation. And when you cram people in close quarters for such a length of time, I won't be surprised if there's more of it. There's also going to be a backlog of people who wanted to get divorced, mostly women who instigate divorces, by the way, who wanted to get divorced and were planning it before this lockdown happened, and they will be all rushing to the courts at the same time. So there will be some kind of surge, but not because of domestic violence. In my opinion, we haven't seen any evidence of that. So they're seeking divorces, and there's reforms to the Divorce Act that are making it tougher on men and easier for women to vilify their ex-partner and call him abusive without any evidence. And they're labeling economic and psychological abuse as coercive and controlling behavior. And you know as well as I do that will only be a measure against men used by women. They will say things like, oh, well, it applies to both men and women, but it will never be used by men. It will not be tolerated to be used against women. That we can see from previous examples. Now, here's Tucker Carlson's issue here. Just bear with me 1 second because I want to see whether we should move on ahead a little bit on this, because I've got a lot of stuff here. Bear with me 1 second. Why is this Tucker Carlson? There he is there. Okay. We're going to get into the COVID-19 stuff, and then I'm going to talk about how this relates to the Restavek slavery that's going on in Haiti right now. Restavek. You can Google this. I was surprised at it, to be honest, when I heard that this thing was going on right as we speak, and that so many children's lives were affected by ongoing slavery today, just not far from where I live. But to say just a few words here, you might have noticed, as I noticed the other day, that a lot of these domestic terrorists, I'm going to continue to call the Black Lives Matter and the Antifa people domestic terrorists, because that's what they are. They are aided and abetted, in many cases, by women. So, and it is feminism, a women's movement, that gave birth to Black Lives Matter, and it gave birth to Antifa. Now, if we look at the situation in Washington, we see that there's a square called Chaz, and I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but they're calling this Chaz, and this is occupied by the Black Lives Matter Antifa group. Now, if you look at Washington itself, the governor is female. The mayor of Seattle is female. The cheerleader of Chaz is a city council member that is very vocal about supporting Chaz, supporting Black Lives Matter. She's female. The police chief in Seattle is female. The entire squad in the U.S., you know the squad, Alexandria Cortez, AOC, I can't remember her, Ocasio-Cortez, and the other three women who are always pushing radical feminist ideas and worse, trying to turn America into a socialist communist country. They're all female. Nancy Pelosi reportedly is female. I can't confirm that, but she's the Speaker of the House of Representatives and identifies herself as a Black Lives Matter representative or Black Lives Matter supporter. She knelt in symbolic support of Black Lives Matter. And of course, we've got other people like Christina Blasey Ford, and the list goes on. I think we even have Joe Biden, another female, who's, although some are suspicious of his short haircut, he appears to be a lesbian with a fetish for smelling women's hair, especially little girls' hair. This is what's going on the left side of politics for quite a long time now. So how is it that all of that support comes towards domestic terrorists? Even the university centers today, they're completely dominated. You know, I talk about this all the time. They're completely dominated by feminism and leftist ideology. Feminism has become legitimately, we can say feminism is a religion, a very strong religion today. We can compare this period of time to when the church was extraordinarily strong through all of the culture, and that if you blasphemed, you could get excommunicated. And that is what's going on almost every day in the university systems. We're seeing people blaspheming by saying something like, sex is biological. Sex is biological. That's a blaspheme in the feminist religion. And people are losing their jobs for this. And we've seen a million of these things. So I'm going to leave that bit right at that for now. And let's get on with this, the next section of this. First, talking about Tucker Carlson losing 6 major advertisers after criticizing Black Lives Matter. Again, this is blaspheming. Tucker Carlson has blasphemed according to leftist ideology. And here is the list of them. I suggest that we remember these companies. I'm not going to read them all out. And here's Councilwoman Sawant, who says Chaz should be permanently in community control. She's a city councilor who's calling for, of course, rebellion. She's calling for the mayor to be kicked out of power. She just opened the doors and lets the Black Lives Matter into City Hall. And she didn't even resist into the police headquarters as well, and didn't even resist having them take over that section of downtown Seattle. Let's read on here. As the Seattle Police Department works to broker a deal with protesters occupying an autonomous zone in the heart of Capitol Hill, a Seattle City Council member said the area known as Chaz should remain a community control permanently. There is no even resistance to these domestic terrorists. And the reason is they themselves are on the side of the domestic terrorists. Reading on. The Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, known as Chaz, has been in community control since Tuesday, when Seattle Police Chief Carmen Best decreased officers present in the East Precinct to allow for, quote, peaceful protests. Apparently, these peaceful protests include someone getting shot in there recently. And reading on, Seattle Councilwoman Shama Sawant called Chaz movement a major victory. Clearly, she is a domestic terrorist. She said the area should be turned over permanently into community control instead of back in the hands of the Seattle Police Department. Reading onward, Savant said she plans to create legislation to turn the East Precinct into a community center for restorative justice. The councilwoman wants to discuss the legislation with people involved in Chaz, Black community organizations, restorative justice, faith, antichrist. That's a Freudian slip, but it's probably better than anti-racist. They are in the hands of the antichrists. Not that I'm not a strong religious Christian. I was born Christian, but I'm not a strong religious person. But that's another complicated topic for another day. Anyways, let me read on here. In faith, anti-racist, renter organizations, land trusts, groups, labor unions that have proven record of fighting racism. They've got a boogeyman up there, folks. Boogeymans are invisible because they don't exist. But they're very useful because you can justify anything by getting people afraid of the boogeyman. Let's read on. Trump called Inslee radical. Inslee is, which one was Inslee? I think might be I can't remember which one was Inslee, but she's a female politician leader in Washington. And he threatened to take back the city if the officials did not intervene. He said the officials are being taunted and played by protesters. That is true. Let's read on. In a subsequent tweet, Trump said domestic terrorists have taken over Seattle, which is in the midst of its second consecutive week of protests in the wake of George Floyd's death. I'd like to talk some bit about George Floyd soon, and I haven't confirmed any of these things, but it looks like George Floyd may have been assassinated by Chauvin because Floyd was risking causing trouble for the Mexican drug cartels running drug money through that bar club where the two of them worked. But that's a long topic. I don't have that prepared to talk about today. It's looking pretty suspicious, though, as the club was burnt to the ground shortly afterwards, eliminating all the evidence that would tie a number of heavy drug kings to embarrassing and difficult situations. Let's read on. Durkin and Inslee responded to Trump's tweets with their own jabs. Make us all safe, Durkin tweeted Wednesday night. Go back to your bunker. Black Lives Matter. This is the divide that I think is non-breachable in our culture today. Inslee responded to Trump, a man who is totally incapable of governing should stay out of Washington State's business. Stoop tweeting. Now, let's just meditate upon that tweet, that claim. A man who is totally incapable of governing. This in a city in chaos, in protests and riots, where the police have been told to stand down or have abandoned their posts, where they can't even control their own city. And she is saying a man who is incapable of governing. And this Inslee, I think, is the mayor of Seattle. She is the one who is being ousted by her own people, making the accusation towards Trump is a man totally incapable of governing. Incredible. But there we have it. They are in total denial of reality. It's Orwellian stuff through and through. Let's read from the top. In a YouTube video to her staff, Best said she did not agree with the move to hastily abandon the precinct building. The police chief said, call response times in the area normally served by the East Precinct have tripled in the 3 days since Chaz's inception. Tripled. Think about that. You're being held at gunpoint, or you're being robbed in your house, or whatever is going on, not held at gunpoint, but some bad thing is going on and taking 3 times as long for them to respond now. From just over 5 minutes to 18 minutes. That's enough time for you to be killed. Secondary calls are taking almost an hour, she said. This is what they're calling a victory over there. It's insanity, folks. Absolute insanity. Now, this is the main topic of the session today, in that the invisibility of women, it's what I'm referring to, and I think you all guessed this. I'm talking about the invisibility of women as perpetrators, women as culpable in all of the problems that the feminists pretend to care about. And that's, I can't overestimate that. Feminists, Black Lives Matter is a feminist child. Antifa is a feminist child. These people pretend to care about issues. They don't. They care about their own power. They care about gathering privileges and free benefits. But they don't care about the issues, because if they did care about the issues, they wouldn't play so many manipulative head games. Let's look at what's going on in sex trafficking, one of the issues that feminists pretend to care about, as they also pretend to care about men's issues. But really, when it gets down to it, feminists don't care about any issues. They only care about power for feminists. Women, sex trafficking, other women, the problem is getting worse. These are all recent headlines I'm going to read out here. More and more women are luring victims into prostitution, with the UK considered fertile ground. Here, another one. A shocking 38% of sex trafficking suspects are women, and many are former victims. I suspect, as usual, that these numbers are an underestimate of the true value, because it's very difficult to get women statistically counted for their bad deeds, as we've seen with FBI statistics on rates of women murdering men as with female murderers. They always seem to escape the statistics collection process, sometimes by plea dealing to a lesser charge, sometimes by not being counted because they hired a male to do the killing or convinced the male to do the killing. Let's carry on here. In this headline, AP, these all refer to separate instances. These are all separate incidents, folks. It's not several headlines of the same incident. These are separate incidents. Women charged in sex trafficking scheme involving teen girls, May 2020. Wichita woman charged with sex trafficking of child with online photos of 17-year-old. This is February 2020. Woman charged with human trafficking offenses, October 2019. A woman has been charged by police investigating the human trafficking and exploitations of dozens of Slovak migrants. This is in the UK. Another one. Woman faces new charges in alleged human trafficking of teen at Raleigh Motel. This is January 2020. These are all recent incidents, folks. And this is leading up to the main issue here. And having heard today, being alerted to this today, that the Restavek slavery scheme is going on in Haiti, which is very near to where I live, right? I'm staying right now. And there's hundreds of thousands of slaves today. Let's look at how that's happening and how they're then characterizing it. Okay, this is really quite important here. Bear with me a second. Okay, read the headline with me here. I was when I first started Googling this, I came across quite a few hits, of course. And then I was encouraged by the headline here, because I know this is going on, but nobody's writing about it, nobody's being honest about it. But follow this closely. Hundreds of thousands of Haitian children suffer in slavery and women play a key role in perpetuating the system. Okay, so you would think, just sit back for a moment here, let me take a sip of my coffee, because we don't see feminists or even the media being honest about anything that women do badly, that women perpetrate as perpetrators, any crimes. So, being encouraged, I read the article, of course, and let's have a look at what they say. Okay. A female system of slavery. This is down into the article a little bit. I do recommend that you read the entire article. It is fascinating. It's a very serious and problematic issue. I'm quite concerned about that. A female system of slavery. You think, okay, we're going to get to the bottom of this. Finally, we're going to start treating the issue as an issue, not as a gender lens from feminists as how women are victims. We're going to address the issue here. This is what it appears. What I found there, both shocked, and this, I'm going to just give you a bit background. This is a woman who's decided to spend her life or focus on slavery around the world, and went to Haiti to study the situation. So here she's reporting back on this article. What I found there both shocked me and confirmed what I'd suspected. Restavek children are part of a female-dominated system of child slavery. Let's read that over again. It's refreshing to hear some truth here. Restavek children are part of a female-dominated system of child slavery. Do you remember that woman who wrote the book, The Manipulated Man? She talked about how women use their children as hostages in the manipulation of men. This is a common theme, and this entire theme deserves an enormous amount of research. In the future, when feminists don't dominate the universities again, there are going to be a ton of very important research PhDs to be done in psychology, history, and sociology, because none of it can be done in universities today. And if that's something you want to focus on, I would say you do it outside of the universities on your own if you can afford it, because there's some incredible groundbreaking work to be done in this area. But let's read on. Restavek children are part of a female-dominated system of child slavery. They are typically taken from rural areas where economic poverty is extremely grave and widespread, to urban centers where poverty can sometimes be felt on an even deeper level because of the lack of access to natural resources. Okay, fair enough. Let's read another quote. It soon became evident that the violence associated with the female-dominated Restavek system goes beyond a means to coerce and control, and is actually more indicative of the mental states of the women in question. Okay, fair enough. It became evident that it goes beyond this. Let's read from another quote here. Female trafficking. Some elements of the Restavek system of child slavery are specific to Haiti, but one thing is universal across the planet: the position of women as primary caregivers to children. This is especially significant in societies where forced labor is prevalent. Women's complicity is a core element of certain trafficking systems, but their role as primary caregivers tends to hide this fact. Okay, so far it's not terribly surprising. I could see where she might want to develop that theme somewhat. Reading from the top. The wider question remains: what is it about women's lives in Haiti that causes and allows child slavery to happen? The answer is rooted in women's experiences of poverty and the ways, you got it, gender-based violence is felt, not only as physical violence and sexual abuse, but in the many ways gender hierarchies are established and maintained. Here we go. Feminism. Read on. Poverty worldwide has been found to affect women disproportionately. Who knew, huh? More feminist lies, of course. Not only in terms of monetary, but also social and political power. The various culturally specific but universally applied gender norms that give women limitless responsibilities. Wow. She says, she actually writes this stuff, but then she's in a feminist environment. That give women limitless responsibility and limited power form dangerous territory for those whose safety exists within the boundaries of women's authority. Children. As Haiti's historical, economic, and societal problems bear down on the population, women suffer the consequences disproportionately. Is it any wonder that children are exposed to such dangers as a consequence? Notice how now she has carte blanche, forgiven, even explained, forgiven the women, not only forgiven the women, but she has painted those women who are participating in selling children as slaves and who run that child slave network. She has now painted them as victims. These women in Haiti, according to this woman who researched it, and she's a feminist, I've got some information on this. According to this woman, they are victims. Incredible. And here comes, I believe, the clincher. The lesson here is that gendered structural inequalities have direct adverse effects on children. It is key we take this into account as we try to formulate solutions to the modern slavery crisis. Structural inequalities. These women are victims. They, according to this woman, it all comes down to men oppressing women again. I've got some insight to show you about the culture in Haiti about this very issue here, and it does not support, no surprise, it does not support what this gender bigot is saying, this feminist. And here she is, PhD of Modern Slavery and Gender Studies. Okay, as soon as you throw, and you know as well as I do, as soon as you throw something like "and gender studies" on something, you know that all logic, all evidence, all rational thinking is thrown out the window. And it is with this woman. Completely irrational. You know the conclusion before you start the study that women are victims of men, and this woman did exactly that. She played the feminist fiddle. PhD of Modern Slavery and Gender Studies. Incredible. I've been at this a long time. I keep saying it, but I keep getting surprised. I can't say honestly surprised, but I had a little moment of hope there when I saw that somebody was going to call out women on their culpability for running these unacceptable, these crimes. Here she is here. I'm not going to read all this out, but she's got her PhD in gender-based violence and all the rest of that. This is a PhD in feminist lying, crying, and manipulating. Listen to this here. Read this out here. By focusing on the perpetrators, which were for the most part women, she was able to uncover the root causes of child trafficking, which are based in gender inequality and violence in a way that has not been done anywhere else in the world. In other words, she waved her hands around, lied like a, I'm not going to say it, I'm biting my tongue here. She lied throughout, used the 40 or 50 years of feminist gish gallop crap coming out of the universities to turn the villains who are selling children into slavery and turn them into victims because they are women. Let's read on here. And here's her Twitter account. You can have a look at that if you want. It's not very interesting. And this is coming from her blog posts now. She has a blog site, and the links are in the description if you want to check it out. It's also not very interesting. But anyways, how can women's rights, she says, be separated from those of children? How can we expect children to be protected if those responsible for them the world over are victims of violence, oppression, harassment, bullying, intimidation, systemic hierarchical downgrading, and theft of power? Everything that comes from feminists puts women as victims and blames men, and seeks to get women off the hook for any and every crime they commit. Reading from the top. Gender-based violence is a symptom of a systemic disrespect for humanity, and it victimizes not just women, who do bear the brunt of it, admittedly. Aw, isn't that sweet? She's admitting that women bear the brunt of gender-based violence. What nonsense that is. But let's read on. But also children, marginalized groups, LGBT plus people, men, and society as a whole. And I do not mean to invoke the argument that men and boys can also be victims of sexual violence. She doesn't even want to admit that men and boys can be victims of sexual violence. She was worried in writing that feminists would come and say, how dare you say that men and boys can be victims of sexual violence? She felt she had to write that disclaimer in there. While this is true, it does not have its place in an argument in which the scale of violence against women clearly dwarfs any other kind of violence on the planet. Read that last statement in the sheer audacity of the lie. In every single measure, men experience more violence than women. In every measure, everywhere in the world. When you are facing a feminist or anybody who puts a credential at in their byline that they are gender studies, feminism, you know you are dealing with a psychopathic, sociopathic liar. They have absolutely no ability to look clearly and speak the truth. Unbelievable as it is. Let's read on from her blog. Where women suffer, there is no dignity, no freedom, no equality, and no human rights for anyone in society. Listen to the size of that statement. In other words, we must eliminate all women's suffering before we can have anything for anyone else in society. That's what she means. And feminists literally do mean that. They will turn the entire culture around repairing their hangnail before they will deal with the murder of men, with suicide, with stealing men's children away from them, with women selling children into slavery. They will deal, even their hangnails need to be repaired first. Let's read on. For equality encompasses more than raising the bar for the oppressed. It also means that the most privileged must value it and human rights and human dignity more than they value power. Wow, that's coming out of a feminist's mouth. As my great mentor and friend Kevin Bales said during his keynote speech at Trust 2018, quote, when you are accustomed to privilege, equality feels like oppression. Well, you feminists, if women ever get equality, you're going to feel oppressed like you never imagined possible. Let's read on. Here's her blog post here, her blog site. Now, as a little follow-up to this, after reading this kind of incredible switcheroo, this switching of the table, this magic act of turning despicable women who sell children into slavery. These are despicable women. And having just read how this despicable feminist turned those despicable women into victims of mythical male patriarchal oppression. Then I looked into what is a little bit about the culture in Haiti. So let me put a couple of quick screens up here. Here, this is from that article I just flashed on the screen. This one, Gender Roles and Family Life. And I think this is a downloadable PDF that I downloaded, and the link towards the download is in the description of the video. This is what really is the cultural life. And this is not very much. It's just a couple of, just to give you a sense here, because this woman is claiming that that women in Haiti have no choice but are victims of patriarchy, and therefore they're not guilty of selling children into slavery. Incredible. Read this from the top with me. Many women also acquired sufficient capital to become full-time market traders. This is Haitian women. And they were thus economically independent. The income that they earned from non-farm business activities was recognized as their own. They were not required to share it with their husbands. Now, Haiti has a kind, and that's at least in this period and in this area, the poor of the Haiti, who are the ones who participate in the child slavery, they have a kind of civil marriage, like not recognized by the law, but they do it amongst themselves. Probably emerged for practical reasons. Let's read from the top here. The husband and wife often made an explicit agreement about their economic relationship at the beginning of a marriage. These agreements usually required the husband to cultivate at least one plot of land for the wife and to provide her with a house. Women performed most household tasks, though men often did heavy chores such as gathering firewood. So there you have it. The woman, and there's more material in the thing here in the document, but it's a matriarchal society. Women dominate the house. A man, if he wants to marry a woman in Haiti, needs to build her or buy her or acquire a house for her and give it to her. And he is obligated to cultivate a plot of land for her. She has no respective obligations. Her obligations to him don't even include, as we say here, income. Let's read this again. The income that women earned from non-farm business activities was recognized as their own. They were not required to share it with their husbands. Again, here it is in Haiti. What's hers is hers. What's his is hers. In a matriarchal society in which women have almost total control over the children of the marriage and the home. Those are the women who are participating in child slavery known as Restavek. They are not victims. They are purely responsible for their behavior, and feminists are covering for them. Feminists are utterly blind, intellectually corrupt bigots. And as long as feminists have control over our intellectual systems, our universities, we are never going to get to the bottom of the truth of these injustices that are going on in our culture and around the world. Feminism is an evil global empire. It has tentacles all over the world. It has become an incredibly dominating religion. Blaspheming towards feminism gets you kicked out of polite society, loses your job, and puts your life at risk. I'm adding that last one in there because in the last week I've had 2 threats, 2 accusations towards me here in the Dominican Republic. The first of which, and I'm not going to make a big deal of it because it's not threats to my life, but it's things that are coming from the West, and they're directly related to feminism because Black Lives Matter and Antifa, they're children of feminism. Feminism is an intellectually bankrupt, corrupt system of bigotry. People here all around the world are seeing these videos. They're buying into this Black Lives Matter, white people are racist, white supremacy is growing around the world. They're buying into that. Here in the Dominican Republic, I was accused of being a white supremacist. And then just this morning, while on my walk, I'm not going to make a big deal out of this, but I'm keeping an eye on this situation. I believe to be a Haitian fellow, stopped his work, straightened his back up, looked straight at me, and quite aggressively said, "What's up?" and the N-word. Never in my life has somebody ever said, "What's up?" and then "What's up?" and referring to me with the N-word. Now, I take that to be coming directly from this Black Lives Matter bigotry. This bigotry of painting white people as white supremacists. It's spreading around the world, and a lot of people are believing it. And I think there's going to be increased incidents of violence, murder, and more directly as a result of feminists that have been at this hate mongering for 50 or 60 years. People like Nancy Pelosi are culpable. The squad, they're culpable. These mayors and governors who are allowing and Black Lives Matter to grow unopposed, they're culpable. They are painting white people into a villain group. They are giving the go-ahead to say, you can do what you want to them. And they are. So in any case, that's all I have for today, folks. I'm going to sign off now, but I do like to remind everybody to do something you love every single day. It's really important. Even no matter how bad it is, if you do something you love every single day, it will help. So be safe out there. And with that, I hope to see you again tomorrow or Monday at the latest. Ciao.